Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for coming out this evening. My name's Stuart McAllister. I am the translator for Ken. Actually, it's working the other way around. He has picked me up as a Scottish refugee so that he can teach me how to speak English properly here in the South. But it's a joy to be out tonight in this venue, and we're very grateful to the church for allowing them to use this facility again. I think this is going to be a very exciting evening. I know in the last year and a half, within Reflections, as I was being introduced, I'm a new arrival into the ministry with Ken, but we were looking at this book and the art. I was ravished by these pictures and wondered what the book would look like. So when it finally arrived there towards the end of the year, we've been thrilled, but there hasn't been much of an opportunity yet for Ken to do some presentation of the pictures itself and tell the story behind the art. So I think tonight I'm looking forward myself to hear this, and I think you'll be just wowed by these pictures. So first of all, welcome. We're so grateful you're here. As is ever the case, we have some resources as well. We've brought a few things. The Angel and the Voyager will be available tonight, and Ken was just saying because normally we sell it for $59, but it'll be available for $50 if you want early Christmas presents for next year for your friends. We got in a bit late with that this year. There's also a couple of newer books that Ken had been working on, Leverage, which is really handling how to sort of eternal perspective on finances, and a very exciting book called Recalibrate. Last year particularly, I found, or the last 2 years, talking to a lot of men and women whose maybe their relationships have gone difficult, or maybe it was the COVID issue or the economy or just life in general. They were at major transitions. Asking questions, how do we navigate through these things? Recalibrate is a book that actually not only addresses that very thoroughly, but gives incredible exercises on which you can do individually, or you can do in groups, or you can do in churches. So Recalibrate's also available there at the back. We also have, we're trying to come into the 21st century now, so we're updating some of our technology. There are QR codes if you want to sign up for the regular prayer information that we have, our daily growth, the Reflections newsletter, and then we have a retreat at the Billy Graham Center in May 19th through 21st, where we're going to be looking, we'll be at the Cove. I don't know how many of you have been to the Cove. A marvelous place, and really it's one of, Ken uses the phrase, one of these thin spaces, and I think that's true, a place that has been prayed over, and just incredible hospitality from the Billy Graham team. But we want to look at basically dealing with, dealing in a time of chaos, seeking coherence through the gospel, the centrality of Christ. And so there'll be a team of us supporting Ken and working together, and I hope that will be a good time. If you want to come for a spiritual retreat and an encounter with the Lord, we hope that will be something that you'll put on your radar. So we are excited. I mean, I think one of the things in this, Ken's vision over the years has been this ministry to create resources. As you well know, and many of you know better than I've known Ken for 25 years, but and sat with him sometimes as we worked through and talked about books and ideas and philosophy. And being a polymath, he loves to, whether it's science or philosophy, the scriptures, spirituality. And I think this is really a part we want to do, is find that coherent center through the gospel and how the gospel integrates, how the beauty of Christ is shown. And I think this art itself, as what will talk about, subcreation, when you see what a human being who is in love with God can also create these marvelous things that draw us into the story, into the bigger narrative, into this journey of faith. So I'm pretty excited about tonight. I think this will be a great evening for us, and I'm looking forward to hearing the presentation. And let's just begin in prayer, and then it'll be over to Ken. Father, thank you so much for this time. Thank you for being here in this beautiful church and their kindness in opening their facilities to allow us to come. Lord, as we think about what's going on around the world, we think of the violence in our own country in the last few weeks. We think of many people are senselessly shot and killed on the streets. We think of the Ukrainian war. It's no small thing to be in a place of peace and to have a place of beauty and a place of goodness and a place where truth can be spoken of. So we ask you tonight, Lord, that you will draw near And as we contemplate these marvelous things, these pictures and the story, the narrative of creation, give Ken favor, Lord, and just grace and strength as he presents to us tonight. And we just ask that we would see you through all these things as we surrender this time to you, Lord, in Jesus' name. Amen. So Dr. Ken Boa needs no introduction. Ken, come on.
Good to be with you tonight, and I'm looking forward to kind of walking you through how did this book come into being? What inspired it, and why does this matter for us? Because one of the themes that we've talked about, and Stuart just mentioned it just before his prayer, was this sequence of beauty, goodness, and truth. And I've switched the sequence because I used to have truth and then goodness and beauty, but now I realize it's God who approaches us, even in a fallen world, through the beauty of his created order. And it is through beauty that wins the heart and then opens up the door for goodness and truth. And so it's really what connects, what we might say, mystery with those themes. We live in that world, and that's why as a philosopher of science, the more I'm looking at the natural world, the more astonished I become when I do that. But just to give you a little bit of a journey of where we've been, where this all happened. It was back in the Magical Mystery Tour, July 2018, as my friend Edgar Schaefer likes to put it. And we happened to be in Washington, D.C., and we went to the National Gallery of Art. We went as well to the Botanical Gardens. And after I saw these Voyage of Life paintings, and I had forgotten some of the details that Edgar wrote, but he wrote it this way. He said, God saved the best for last in his little chronicle. Robert Cole's Voyage of Life paintings were the big takeaway for all three of us, I think. Back at the hotel, it was amusing to bounce between Ken's ideas on how to present Cole's painting for the betterment of mankind and Raymond's ideas on how to lengthen one's hamstrings. So kind of an interesting concept. But so what we ended up doing one of the afternoons we were there was we went to the Botanical Gardens first, and there we really bathed in some wonderful beauty that is absolutely splendid, and I am more and more ravished by the beauty of the created order when you just look at the structures of these wonders that we beheld together. And so this was July of 2018. I had to take a close-up of this one just to see how beautiful the created order is, and how incredible just the variety, the richness, the changes, and so forth. And so we were immersed in this environment together. And so this was what of course, I would call created beauty, and it's so splendid. I couldn't resist showing you a few of these photos because it's reminiscent of the preparation we had for another kind of beauty as we went through. So as we kind of moved, or suddenly, what happened here? We went to the National Gallery of Art, and it's my habit always to show what we're about to see before I show the painting, you see? So now we've moved from created beauty to sub-created beauty. And so we're looking at beauty and being ravished that day by the natural order, and then we see how God has used people as well as we went through this museum. And some of my favorite exemplars, Renoir's chrysanthemums, and just having the opportunity to behold this after taking in the splendor of the natural world was a rich, almost overwhelming experience. Near the lake, for example, the two sisters on the terrace. So Monet's The Artist's House. So this is how I always know what I'm looking at, is take the photo of what they show, and then I can see the painting right there. So this is what we did. And so as we went through this famous Seurat painting, of course, and you can see the exquisite works that have been made by the world of people who have got an eye for the beauty that God has made and take their cue from the natural world. And that's one of the things I love about Monet and many of the Impressionists as well. Henri Rousseau always fascinated me. René Magritte, Cézanne, Van Gogh, and we see wonderful things, the Poet's Garden. And as we went through these wonderful things, Courbet and John William Turner, and then wham, all of a sudden, at the end of our time, we were trying to decide whether we were going to stay or we were going to just go out. We were worn out. because we'd already gone then to the botanical gardens, spent the whole day. When you go to a museum, what do? You start with basically the Mesopotamians, the Sumerians, and you work your way up through history, and you move into the Greco-Roman period, and then you move into classical periods and so forth, the whole ancient, medieval, and modern spheres. And so you get worn out. You hear about museum hands. I get just museum exhaustion. And after a while, we were at the end of the day, should we bother? And we decided, okay, there's one more room we're going to see. Well, God saved the best for last in our case because it opened up an entire door. And I took this photo. This is actually what I took in July 2018. And I was amazed because it was Thomas Cole's own work, his own writing, that he described this, and it turned out to what I'd later discover was the second set of the Voyage of Life that he had made. And so here's his description, and here's my picture, my photo of that painting in the gallery of the original. And it was a massive painting. It's about 8 feet by 6 feet. It's not a small thing, and it was displayed in a kind of an octagonal arrangement, and it was almost overwhelming. The three of us realized we're watching something amazing. It's a journey that's more than art. It's an allegorical portrait. It's a way of looking at life through this metaphor of being on a river. So then his second category was youth. So he started with childhood. And then his description, again, in 1840, when he did the original set of the paintings. And then this Voyage of Life, and we're going to take you through these things. And then manhood, the third age, and then we move into the fourth age of old age. And what did it mean? I was kind of overwhelmed as we took it all in. And in our processing then, as Edgar journaled, I got obsessed with what can I do with this, you see. It just became something I wanted to share, to process and to think about. And I remember having a very special process of thinking about what I might say and do. But then the next year, so it was in 2019, I met with Carolyn Price, Terry Cox for lunch. We went to Bistro Nico, and I still remember being outside. And we then collectively decided that's what we're going to do. We're going to do a kind of a special book out of this. We kind of generated it. We thought it'd be a 4-part series I was going to teach at my Sunday morning class. It ended up being 10. And so that's what gave inspiration, because I began to realize it all connects together. It's not just the painting. It's also how does this whole journey of life affect one's journey in terms of film and music and art and architecture and other motifs, you see, poetry. So you begin to put all those components together and you realize you have a whole lot of motifs that deal with the fundamental struggles that we all encounter in this world. And that has to do with this whole process of what it means to live well in this world. And so when we go to the angel, what emerged from this thing then was this series that I did. And it was a series of videos that we did on the Voyage of Life. And it's way back here. And so I thought it was going to be a 4-part series. Then I did another one. Well, let's try another one here. So I did yet another one here. So turned out to be 8 of these things that we did. And there they are. So it evolved. And that one thing led to another, and began to take the transcriptions of this, and then editing, and a couple of editors. And ultimately, it ended up being something better than I might have expected, something like this. It was a wonderful way of looking at how not just the angel and the Voyager in terms of the Voyage of Life, but also the course of empire. So there are 2 sets of paintings we decided to focus on, not just one. And these motifs, which I want to walk you through then, were developed in 4 basic chapters. The first one was, why are we here and where are we going? It's something we all have in common, because whether we like it or not, we are all on the same river, this river of life, and you cannot get off of it. It's this whole cycle of birth, growth, decay, and death. And so what does this mean? So we looked at Cole's life and then worked through his career. And then we move into this realm of the cycles of life and this concept of what does it mean that we, in visual arts, in music, in poetry, and then seeing how that manifested itself in his own life as well. And then the third chapter out of the 4 then do a comparative study, as it were, between two different sequences. And one is the Voyage of Life series, the 4 paintings, and then there were 5 paintings he did in what he called the Course of Empire. But they both point out the same thing, only one is on a larger scale. And so we compare those, and then finally the Ocean of Eternity, and themes that really resonate with us and apply to our own life journeys today. So this is the first painting that I saw that inspired this whole journey, this extraordinary picture where you have this hourglass on the top of it, and you see this motif here where you have this hourglass is here, and the houris are here, these hours that are granted to us, and a child that is not able to see what's behind, steering the rudder, you see. So it's a whole picture of what that means, and I'm going to unpack what that means in terms of our understanding of this book. So it was a very remarkable experience for us indeed to take you through it. So let me just kind of take you on a journey. And first thing I want to comment is the singular power of art to simultaneously reflect and also to reveal. It's part of the power of art to do that. It powerfully portrays what I describe as the universality of our time on Earth, the natural life cycle of birth, growth, decay, and depth. And this whole idea of why is it so almost imperceptible? The interesting thought experiment. Imagine that you had a set of photographs, and you take the same day once every year. And you have now 50 photographs, or whatever it happened to be. That'd be a rather depressing thing to watch through, the morbidity of decay. And you see this inexorable process that we know is irresistible. We try to deny it in every way we can, and yet it's going to be an inevitability. And is it there for a reason? What are the approaches that we can take to it? And so we are forced against our will to really process these things. My view, as I like to put it, is age conspires with God. It's a conspiracy, I tell you, because whether you like it or not, you are in a road, you're on this journey, you're in this river, and you cannot stop time, you can't go backward. So what are you going to do with it? Especially as the years continue on and our morbidity increases, you've got to make a decision. And I say that it conspires with God to transfer our hope from that which is passing away to that which is going to endure. But it depends on our response to what's in front of us. So as time loses its luster and there's a yearning, we would hope for a more permanent, more incorruptible source of hope. This is the concept that we're wrestling with here as we think about it. And with Thomas Cole himself, without going into too much detail, because I want to confine my thoughts to give you just a big overview of the themes in this book, born in 1801 in Lancashire. And then he came over to Ohio, and then later moved to Philadelphia and then to Catskill. And he was really the founder of the so-called Hudson River School art movement. It was an informal group comprising landscape painters. A lot of them were people who then, some of the names would be better known. Frederick Edwin Church, you'll see in a lot of museums as well. Albert Bierstadt and Asher Brown Durand. And there was a kind of an overall arching theme of being this, what's sublime? What draws us? What is it about beauty that creates another sense, a sense of wonder? And if we have the eyes to see, does that wonder then lead to another level of apprehension, namely curiosity? And does that curiosity lead to yet another level, which would be submission to the mystery in which we're enveloped, you see? So there's a process. How do we respond to what's being given to us? So this whole idea of a distinctive melancholy as was associated with this school of art and religious undertones. But in that context, though, Cole became more and more theistic. Many of these painters and writers were more deistic or transcendentalist in their thinking. Cole, it's interesting in his own journey, seems to have become more and more Christocentric, more and more focusing his themes around the cross, not just a nebulous religiosity, but rather very specific. Here's an outline of his journey, and it's just to look at the dates, is to reveal what a short window of time this man had, because he died unexpectedly in 1848, just when they had built this fabulous studio. It was the first of its kind in the United States. It was a European salon. exquisite. Everything's ready. He's at the peak of his career, at the peak of his prowess and his reputation. And then he dies of a congestion of his lungs in a few days. It's all gone. It's an amazing thought, but all the work that he did during this period of time, so we outline that and work our way through that. Beautiful landscapes, though, that were done in this period of time. Beautiful images that we can see of illustrating that area, especially around New York, the Catskills and so forth. And so beautiful images as well of themes and motifs, inspired in part also by James Fenimore Cooper, and Cooper loved Cole's work as well. And so there are certain fundamental themes about the establishment of the United States and motifs along this line. This is from The Last of the Mohegans, this image here. So you have a movement then that's where he's trying to capture this world. A deep reverence for nature you could see was always evident in his work. Underlying motifs of light and darkness, a mind's eye vision. And one of the descriptions I like is that the dominating inevitable forces that eclipse the unfolding human drama, he was well able to capture that, and also did allegorical work as well, trying to use his artwork to provide analogies and images. One of those examples would be this image here of what he calls expulsion, moon and firelight in 1828. And it's an expulsion, effectively, from the Garden of Eden. So there are biblical motifs that he uses. And in this work, then, you can see that there has been a removal from here, and then, as a consequence, being expelled into a barren world outside. Fascinating, and it's very deliberate. This is based upon a real waterfall that he knew about. But in this theme here, you have this vertical image here, and so a very cruciform intentional pattern, you see. So these are little symbolic motifs that he would use in his work to describe certain themes. Another such example would be this one that would be called this flood, the waters of the deluge, the subsiding of the waters of the deluge. And it was sort of a symbol of the United States after its deluge as well. It's kind of that after likens the American Revolution to the great flood of Genesis 7, both birthing a new beginning after ridding the land of corruption is the notion. And here in our description, a lone skull resting against the rock suggests that the world has been washed clean of human folly. And so you see after the flood here, there's a skull right there. And then you have the ark in the distance, and then there is the dove right here. So you have this. And I realized as I was doing this that I'm going to add a little insert later on. There's a little room for it. Why not put it in? We've done it in other places. I like this one as well. This motif of how he uses light and darkness. This motif of the appearance of the angels at the birth scene. This three groups who are responding to it. One is overwhelmed, another yet overwhelmed, the young one, and then the middle, and then the sage who's looking up at the mystery that is beholding. As at the distance, you can see the Star of Bethlehem overlooking that house. So it's a beautiful portrait, once again, of an allegorical portrait, but it's nicely conveying itself, giving it a fresh insight in looking at this. He did this series as well, a series on the desolation of empires, and looking at that, and we're going to unpack that a little bit more, about what he was seeing the movement of when he went to Europe for the first time in 1833. He saw during that, for the first time, the ruins of an ancient civilization, which of course he hadn't seen in that same way. And that inspired him then to do a series of 5 paintings. Every one of these 5 paintings has this same motif of stability, and that is this boulder that doesn't change in those 5 paintings. It's a motif of something that is remaining unchanged. Its constancy serves as a reminder of nature's permanence. But its precarious position shows the transience of the human condition, the transience of man. And so as he's creating these extraordinary paintings, as we're going to talk about them in a moment, we see motifs that are being developed, allegories and themes about the decay not only of a person's life, but of a whole civilization, an empire as well. So there are themes along this line. Other paintings he did subsequent to this wonderful painting, and this imagery here of the oxbow. And even here, there's a lot of symbolism. The artist himself, you can see, there he is. He's kind of hanging around there, you see. That's him. And you see, overlooking this image, certain motifs, even Hebrew letters up here in the mountain, to symbolize Shaddai and to symbolize the Noah. So lots of things. When a person knew it was a coal painting, they knew that you had to look for layers of depth and meaning in it. And this is, of course, what we're going to be talking about during this period of time, about these four great paintings about birth, growth, decay, and death. Some subsequent paintings that he did as well, again, what he called the picnic. And even here, though, you can see this, while it's still a beautiful environment, it's still already, there's a price that's being paid. And so there's always this theme of the natural ecology of things and how this settling in changes the rules. His later paintings are interesting to me because though he died unexpectedly, he left some sketches and some studies for later works that he would do. And one of those works that he was going to do was called The Cross and the World. I wanted to call your attention to this as well. The light of God and against the darkness of sin and a spiritual and an earthly glory. And what you see here is an evangelist, and he's got he's now giving them the two sons, as it were. One goes off in this direction, one in another direction. One heads off to what appears to be a world of well-being and what appears to be good for him. But he's telling him to go this way. The other one goes the opposite direction. And so the consequences of the choice that one makes for that. Another theme here is this is what again, these are sketches, these are not the actual paintings he would have done, but you can already see this castle in the air, the idea of youth again, that's not unlike what we'll see in one of his earlier pictures. So everything looks rosy. He's going in a way that looks very, very appealing to him. It's something that would be naturally wanting to follow, whereas the other son goes off in the other direction entirely. But what's fascinating about these themes here is what they both find at the end, because the one who goes off and sees those castles ends up in this despair, whereas the one who takes the way of the cross ends up with a glory and a joy that's beyond anything he's known in this world, with the angelic hosts welcoming him up into the presence of God. And I noticed as well this cruciform pattern in his writings, in his paintings, becomes more and more frequent as he goes by. And I think there's evidence of his own spiritual journey as well, less and less vague and more Christocentric in his work and in his process. So in chapter 2, we talk about these paintings in a larger sense, the memento mori, the cycles of life. And I remember very well doing a series of sermons up in an old church in Connecticut, and they had this wonderful canopy, a sacred canopy, and they had two memento mori. There was a candle over here that you had, and then there was also an hourglass over here. So the candle and the hourglass, I remember going up there, you have to walk up these steps and so forth, and you're looking down in the audience, or hoping that sacred canopy, that the thing that's holding it doesn't break, because you'll be snuffed out, literally. But I did a strange thing the second time I preached there. I said, next time I go there, I'm going to teach on Psalm 90 and talk about teach us to number our days. And I actually had my props ready. I had a match, and I lit this candle, and I reached over and turned this thing over, and didn't tell them why I did that. But then later they figured it out, that there was a kind of a memento mori. But we were looking at that concept then, and it was a great fun to do. So they're all around you. They're surrounded by it. And there I also explored this extraordinary painting, the Ambassadors of the by Hans Holbein Jr., and how it was really an anamorphic painting. So we use that in this book. And so, as we can see, this motif of the brevity of the earthbound sojourn, captured in so many things, that was a very common theme, the fragility of a flower, the skull, and the hourglass. And so this was a theme that ran through that period of time. They were well aware of this, the need for remembering that our days are brief and short. They're few. Here is, in fact, a little triptych. When it's closed, you can see his skull resting on a brick. He was probably in that realm, that he was probably a bricklayer. But this is when it's opened up here. But all this was part of our common work with art. So this strange feature that looks here, it's an anamorphic painting, looks very nebulous and odd. But if you were actually going down a staircase and the painting were on the right, then you would actually look down on the painting and you'd actually see this instead. So it would be a reminder that even in the peak of their success, death is right there with them, in spite of that. It's always an ongoing motif. You cannot escape that presence of death. We kind of compared that as well with other motifs that relate to this, like Celtic crosses, the high crosses, that would actually combine what was originally the sun cross diagram. It's upside down from our perspective, so that south is above. But you see, here's where we get this concept of Middle Earth, you see. So this idea of Middle Earth here, and east and so forth, so this along this axis, and then the vertical axis here. And this idea of midnight or winter or old age. And so it could be seen in this way as it going around the various cycles of life. Once again, these are themes that were very understood in the artistic realm. And then later, this cross was added to take this symbol, this more or less pagan symbol that had great insight, but then layered it with something that actually gave it a greater richness, the cross. And so it became the Celtic cross. And this was a theme then on multiple levels that we can see that actually carry us through this understanding of the sequence of life. We did this as well as I was teaching through it, and I gave them samples of these various components, each of which relate to a preparation for, a reflection upon, a consideration of the brevity of life, and music that actually does well for contemplative purposes. We did it in poetry as well, and realized there are three approaches that one can take. By resigning to futility, one could then just deal with the fact that we're going to die. And so this Vanitas Vanitatum by John Webster, when he concludes, vain the ambition of kings who seek by trophies and dead things to leave a living name behind and weave but nets to catch the wind. Is that all there is? So there is this motif, just resigned to futility, or to the virgins to make much of time, gather ye rosebuds while ye may. This is used in the Dead Poets Society, if you'll recall, with great effect, to try to remind us to see how brief it is. Be not coy, but use your time, and while ye may go marry. For having lost but once your prime, you may forever tarry. So you have a very brief window of time. So that's one approach you could take, is just make the most of your brief time. It's going to be gone. Or another approach would be, as we can see here with William Butler Yeats, sailing to Byzantium, an attempt to have immortality through art. And I unpack these a good deal more in the teachings that are available on the website where I describe it. But he describes the human condition as sick with desire and fastened to a dying animal. That's our condition. You are sick with desire. If you're thinking you should be sick with longing for more than this world can provide, and yet you're fastened to this dying animal. Who is to deliver us and set us free? So the concept of saying, how can we then achieve something that would last? And his whole idea, his hope, was that through poetry, through his work, that he would attain immortality. Shakespeare does this as well in some of his sonnets. And so this whole concept then, that is there anything I can do? All losses are restored and sorrows end, one might hope, but is that enough? So you had this idea of attaining immortality through art, or just a third approach to take would be hope and eternity. And then John Donne's Holy Sonnet, One short sleep past, we wake eternally, and death shall be no more, death thou shalt die. So it's a different vision entirely of recognizing the brevity of the earthbound sojourn. He, George Herbert and others, did the same thing, and the realization that though this symbol is there is something it's sitting upon, which is solid and which is stable. The shaped stone at the base is a representation of permanence and immortality. There's always this idea. But the cycle that we observe again and again is this continual cycle of birth, growth, decay, and death. And that can be true of a civilization, but it can also be true of a nation. It can be true of a life. It can be true of a year and even of a day. And so when I talk about a day, it has its beginning. This day you woke up and you were kind of raised from the dead, the death of sleep, and then you wake up a little bit more, and then you get your energy. You might get a second wind, but eventually you're going to begin to decay, and you're going to get tired. And then tonight you're going to go to your bed, your death burial chamber, which is your bedroom, and you're going to pull your shroud over your head, and go in a death-like state in total darkness, and then go into a state that's called death. Sleep, a euphemism for death. It's every day is an awake sleeper and arise from the dead, and Christ will shine on you. So it's every day, if you have the eyes to see it, is a mini life. And that's how you should see it, and only to have 2 days in your calendar, this day and that day to come. And that is a wise way to live. So Cole, I think, is exhorting us to see things in that new way. So the focal paintings then that we compare is the childhood, youth, manhood, and old age, which I'm going to unpack a little bit more in just a moment. And the course of empire, their savage and Arcadian state corresponds to the childhood of a civilization, the consummation to the youth of a civilization, the destruction to manhood, and desolation to old age. So it's fascinating how he developed this motif. And I'm going to go to those paintings in just a moment, but the equivalent then is that you have in its earlier ages then the beginnings of a civilization and hunters and so forth, over here, people who are, there's a little small canoe here, very primitive kind of a situation, civilization, but there's that stable rock that's there. And in its pristine stage, then it's actually taken over, and certain motifs then become evident. This child drawing, and this man drawing mathematical symbols in the earth. And so certain components of knowledge and so forth, this Arcadian temple that's being built, and better ships and so forth. So there's an exchange that's taking place. It's still pristine, but it's losing something. And then the next stage, which would correspond to youth, with this time of consummation, where everything is extraordinary, overwhelming, and really almost eliminating the natural world in doing so. You have this incredible motif here of this ruler coming on the back of an elephant in this extreme remarkable state. But nature is being planted, replaced by these kind of potted plants and these artifices of human grandeur. Minerva up here, Diana over here, representing the hunt. And all these themes then are the loss of nature. But there again, once you see, what do we have there? We still have that stable place. It's still unchanged and still pristine. So we can see that in this third. And then in the next one, when we go to destruction, we go effectively to manhood. And with manhood, you really are dealing with the key theme is trouble. The trouble that you begin to experience, that experience then overcomes the youthful naivete. And it's the trouble that we encounter then in this symbol. And so the place is being destroyed. We see chaos, a woman leaping to her death because she's being threatened by this man who's seeking to rape her, and people jumping off, the bridge is broken, everything's falling apart, and yet there it is. That thing is still there, you see. And it's going through the course of the day as well. There's many motifs, and here is his own name, Thomas Cole, that's found on this stone here. So you have him there, you see it right there, 1836. So it's a portrait then of continuing movement away from prosperity to decay. And then in the evening with the moon here, that's the end of its civilization. This is the desolation. This is the old age of a civilization where birds are making their nests in their columns. And all the great things that were achieved are now no more. So you have then the remnants of what was with man. So in these motifs then, we see here, this motif of birth, growth, decay, and death. What's ironic about this is this series of paintings were done for his patron, Luman Reed, who died in 1836, the very year in which these paintings were completed. This is how it was supposed to look on his mantle. It was going to be these two paintings representing dawn, and then the largest one in the center, noon, and then the sunset. It was never to be. So it's intriguing, again, how the very situation is a bit of an irony there. So if I go back to here, and if I look at these parallels, let me just zoom in now on the paintings themselves about the human condition rather than the nation. So here we have these four movements of birth, growth, decay, and death, these four themes. And in the first one, and again, we have Cole's description of it, of childhood and the dark, mysterious unknown out of which he emerges. And we can see up here, then you can't really see the very top. You're not able to see the entirety of the whole. But there's an extraordinary picture. You can't see the top of the mountain is beyond. And there's a mysterious aperture through which he is almost birthed. It's like out of darkness and so forth. And there's this angel behind him. And the angel has the tiller. The child, of course, doesn't see the angel. The child is lavished with beauty and wonder. It has its hourglass, so it has a certain amount of time in which it's been granted on this world. And then it's moving off, and everything is moving beautifully. You have exquisite symbols of fertility and fecundity that abound throughout this picture. But then when we get to youth, though, we have the pretensions and the adolescent aspirations for fame and glory. And so when we get to that imagery here, now the angel is still there, but the youth doesn't see him, didn't see at the beginning. Now he's got the hand on the rudder, and there's his hourglass right here, and he's on the river, and then these are the hours that he's been granted here, and he's moving off in this direction. And as he's looking up, you can see the angle of his hand. And so he's moving up, and you can see that he's looking up in this direction here. And as that direction it's like a cloud-capped tower. It's his ambitions for what life should be like, and so he's convinced that somehow he's going to go down this thing, and he's going to be able to actually continue to go straight up there. What he fails to grasp, however, in this beautiful environment, is that actually there's something actually that's happening he didn't plan on. Namely, the thing goes and takes a right turn. You see, his idea is that I'm going to go up here. What he doesn't know is you're in this boat, and this boat goes here unexpectedly, and there it continues off in this direction here until it goes off and it's going to plummet downwards. So he does not see what's in front of him. So it's, again, a portrait then of him thinking that all the world's at his feet, and yet there's actually going to be a dead end. And by the time he reaches manhood and that time of experience, the deep and abiding sorrows of life and demon forms are above him, like these various themes up above him, that of suicide and temptations for despair. There's still this angel that's above him, though once again he still is oblivious to the angel for the third time. He doesn't see it. But he cries out to God. You'll notice his rudder is broken, and the hours are few, and his boat is in worse condition. And to his horror, he can see beyond. He can see the ocean of death that's beyond him. For the first time, he can see it, and it becomes palpable to him. A friend of mine said, you know that the grave is on the other side. When you get over the hill, it's on the other side. But when you get to a certain age, you can see the darn thing from where you are. So that's exactly what my friend described, who's now with Jesus. He could see it coming. But the fact is, this would be depressing. You notice there's no beauty. It's all been removed. All the things that one had hoped for have fallen apart. And so he's in this terrible condition. And then desolation of old age. And then, yes, for the first time, he beholds in his despair, with no more hourglass, you see, with no rudder, out of control, totally out of control. And for the first time, he sees the one who's been with him, the spirit that has been guiding him all along. So once again, you see pointing, but this time pointing to a different vision, a vision of others of other angelic realms and others who were going to visit him and receive him and further up and further in, heights of joy and glory that the world does not know. So there is this whole motif then of a kind of redemptive dynamic at the end. So he himself then was a very big believer in that motif of what it meant then to be having a hope that goes beyond the grave. Various films that I use to describe this, because you can do it with music, you can do it with poetry, you can do it with any number of things. But with various films, I've thought of Schindler's List in particular, the issue of mortality, the purpose. Is there anything that I did that will last? Is there anything I can do that will endure? Or am I just writing my name on water? Am I putting my name on a building, but really it's going to be totally forgotten? When you go to a graveyard dedicated to the memory of our beloved so-and-so, but you don't even know the name. You see, it means nothing to you. Is there got to be something that can I be remembered? Is there something that will last? And that's the fundamental question that is raised in this. In Schindler's List, this moving scene when Oskar Schindler says, I could have got more. He saved thousands of Jews from certain destruction. But why did I keep the car? 10 people right there, 10 people, 10 more people, this pin, 2 people. So there's a regret there that is illustrated in that film. What could I have done differently when I had the chance? And this is what wisdom invites us to do, is to ask these basic questions of how do I look back on life and look at it from an eternal perspective? And then gaining that perspective, get a vision of where am I heading? That's going to define the past. It'll define everything. So my perspective will shape my understanding of what this life is about, and realize I'm not home, that I'm a soul-forming world and I'm being prepared for home. It's a very different motif. Another film that was interesting to me was the 2007 comedy drama, The Bucket List. Again, there in the motif, they abandon the things that really define them. Here's a billionaire who now realizes that his money isn't going to help him at all. And he's looking, and it brings together people who are otherwise never would have known each other, disparate worlds. But what we share in common is our humanity and the same fact that we're all in this river of life. And so it's, again, another intriguing film. One of my favorites that illustrate this is The Seventh Seal by Bergman, and this extraordinary picture of a knight coming back from the Crusades, having been there 10 years, wondering what that was all about. Did I waste my time? Somewhat cynical in a way, playing a game of chess with death. Even though he knows he'll lose ultimately, he's trying to buy some time. What does he want to buy time for? To accomplish something that'll last, something that's meaningful, something that he can do. And that theme is beautifully developed in the film. And indeed, there are 3 symbols of this. And you have this juggler and his wife who have an innocence. You see, Antonius Bloch represents wrestling with God and meaning. But then he has a squire who total cynic in the film. So those are 2 responses. One's wrestling with God, but he wants God on his terms. And he will not bow to the reality that God will not be found in our terms, but on his. Or another one, the juggler, childlike innocence. And eventually their childlike trust, hope, and joy seem to transcend the angst of the doubting knight and the despair of the cynical squire. So it's an intriguing film that represents this. And then at the end of the book, it's really trading the temporal for the eternal. And what does that look like? And again, this high cross, and using Tennyson's crossing the bar. I hope to see my pilot face to face when I have crossed the bar. And it's this purpose-filled pilgrimage is what we're describing here. Now you can see what I'm doing with this book. It's really a gospel tract. It's just a pretty one. It's a very beautiful book. That's why I wanted the book itself to be beautiful. And if you look at the book, I want you to note the paper. I want you to note the ink. I want you to note the layout, the way it's designed, because it's my view that beauty should be there, not just in the theme, but also in the very representation of that. And it's my desire to have those all go together. But we decided to add this part that I had just come up with as in my thinking, this idea of 4 words of redemption. God's infinite word is the first one, which is his general revelation to all people. The macrocosm, the midicosm, and the microcosm that illuminates the glory of God. And that's known and revealed to all who have the eyes to see. But I believe that God has wired his created order in such a way that everything in it points beyond itself to moral and spiritual truth. For those who have the eyes to see and the ears to hear, they have to be able to receive it. It's there, but what do you do with it? How do you receive it? What does it raise a question? Does it ask you to wonder what life is about? Why am I here? Question of meaning, purpose, and hope. And so the first word then is that God dazzles us and displays his glorious beauty. This is one of my favorite spreads in the book, this 2-page spread, because it represents then all 3 realms, the macrocosm. And by the way, now for the first time in human history, since really the 17th century, we have force multipliers of nature. Namely, we can see the microcosm, which we could never have seen before, and the macrocosm, the microscope, the telescope, and then new instruments that keep on amplifying it. And it's happening now in an exponential way. And as skepticism continues to grow and mount, as it is in our time, God ironically is bumping up the ante of evidence in dramatic ways by using science and technology to do it, which I think is a lovely thing. So it's there. There's always enough evidence to satisfy the mind of a person who chooses a way to make a step in the light. It's not a leap in the dark, but it's a step in the light. But nevertheless, a step has got to be made. A choice is made. And then we go from the infinite word that displays his work on the macrocosm, what I call the midicosm, this world that we're familiar with, this 12-inch thick biosphere, like a gossamer membrane on the sphere of the earth. 12 miles thick, no life below, no life above. And then the microcosm, which is exquisitely beautiful and wonderful and strange. And so the inspired word is his second. So we go from his general revelation known to all to his special revelation. And the infinite word is now manifesting himself in his inspired word and pointing beyond to the one who would come. And so all the inspired word points to is in fact the incarnate word in Jesus, in whom the inspired word takes on human flesh, so it becomes incarnate. So this one who has called all things into being now takes on flesh, the union of the transcendent and the immanent. And then marvel of marvels becomes the indwelling word, beyond all imagination, that the one who created the cosmos is now in you and you in him. Deep and profound mystery, offering us the mystery of the Trinitarian unity and diversity. We're not absorbed into God, we're not being gods, and yet at the same time we are children of God by adoption into his family. He's given us a new past, present, and future. So this indwelling word then redefines us. And so we realize that really, with that perspective, that our suffering in this world is just a blip in eternity. It's temporary, but glory is eternal. And Paul emphasizes that in Romans 8, in particular, when he describes the redemption of nature as well. And so the solution to the dilemma of mortality, I go back to this cruciform imagery here, is really, at the end of the day, not to mistake creation for the creator, as some have done, and getting into a more pantheistic or panentheistic view. There's always a creator-creation distinction because you see, to really have life, it has to be relational. Life without relationship, without people, is not much of a life at the end of the day. We may say we want these things, but when people die, the regrets are that they didn't, or the need for forgiveness, the need for being remembered, the need for meaning. And it's always relationship, but it requires a person, not a thing. You can't have a relationship with all that is, but rather with a one who is now, who holds all things together and yet is a person because of the Trinitarian mystery that God is a society of beings who welcomes us into his glorious presence. And so this is a rich and beautiful overview. And so the solution, as we say, during our earthbound sojourn, is that we're really being prepared for our true home as citizens of heaven. And that's the solution to the dilemma of mortality. So I say if the best moments of beauty, intimacy, and adventure in life create longings in us, Just imagine what their fulfillment would be like. Think about the greatest things that you could ever imagine. What's the most beautiful thing you've ever known, the experience of beauty? What's the most intimate experience you've ever had with another person? And what is the most fun thing you've ever done? So much fun you wish it would never stop. I claim that those are only hints of joys and wonders that we can name but not understand because they're too great for us to grasp. There's so much more. But I promise you this, you will not be disappointed. And so understanding this then, Paul can well say with the words of an overcomer, I consider the sufferings of this present time are not even worthy of being compared with the glory that's to be revealed to us. So this is the solution to the dilemma. And here, this cruciform image at the end is what we're given. And so it's a gospel tract, is what it is. I'd love to get it at the National Gallery of Art in the bookstore. That'd be a pleasant thought, a delicious irony as well. And actually, one of the former curators was looking at it, and you never can tell. But here's the point: it's not inimical to Cole's own idea. This is the point. And this is the way because it's consistent with his own journey. Because in his own art, we could see that he himself moved in this direction and became more and more consumed with those things. Why didn't he have more years? No one can understand why, but his life has had a permanent impact in the lives of so many other people. So that's really the purpose and point of this book. And now we're going to open it up for a time of interaction with you to get your thoughts on any questions you might have. And while we're opening it up, I'm going to just show you a little thing I've got here as well, and it's this reflections here. We've got this little thing. We have a teaching letter here. That would love you to get if you're not getting this. It's a physical letter. It's very attractive, 4-color. And then there's another thing we have, and we'll put this up again later, the Daily Growth newsletter. And also, we're going to have a spring retreat. And so we have those little things up here as well. And we're making these books available again, the physical books here, for $50 instead of $59. And while we're waiting for that, I'll show you I love this screen. It's extremely good, bright and wonderful. And so I just love to look. I actually, when I was in Maui, saw a tree like this rainbow tree. You'd think you can't make this stuff up. It's better than you can imagine. So we're ravished by beauty on every order of magnitude. And again, I do this because I long to see the one who made this and know about the mystery that we call God, who could invent these marvels and wonders. The more you see, the more astonishing it really becomes when you're looking at this. And so the idea that the one who holds the galaxies together and actually is the one who became one with us is an impossible thing to imagine. It's really astonishing. Comments or questions? So you now know what got this off the ground and what got it started. And while we're waiting for that as well, I would comment on one other thing, and it would be there's a website, thomascoleart.com, that gives you a little bit more information on this as well. So you can look at that, and gives you a kind of a journey. So it kind of works your way through. I love the way it holds on there for a while. And then why are we here? Where are we going? Same thing we're just looking at again, something about his life. And what I like about this is it gives you skull symbolism if you want it, and this Celtic crosses if you want it, and more information, how it's seen in music. I'm a big believer in using music to amplify worship. And then the 3 approaches, either resigning to futility, immortality through art, or hope in eternity. So, and then the cycles of life as well. And then his faith in art and how he appears to have come to know Jesus near the end of his life in a more meaningful way. So it's very strong. Okay.
My question is, do you think we carry this regret for not doing enough for others? Love God, love others, when we go to heaven?
It's a great question. Yeah, it's a good question. Thank you. I do think that when I think about my time as when I am brought into the presence of Jesus, that I will not be able to endure his presence unless I go through this thing that's called the Bema, the judgment seat of Christ, where this thing we call the flesh, which has the things you just constantly there. It's like gristle, You know, some things you deal with quickly, and then the other things just seem to stay with you. You just can't get rid of it. All that has to be stripped away, but we can't do it. Only He can do it. So it's going to be a thing in which He will remove that thing that was preventing us from really completely surrendering to Him. Because when we see Him, you couldn't endure His presence, because He cannot abide the presence of anything contrary to the beauty of His character. Because you see, any sin that we call sin is contrary to the beauty of the radiance and glory of the living God. So He Himself removes that at His own price. And yet it says, if this happens, they have a foundation, which is Christ, 1 Corinthians 3. But there's also this concept of actually giving an account, though. So in this very strong account, I process this. And the best metaphor I know in 1 Corinthians 3 is this, let me see here. Yes, in chapter 3. So the builder, you're building a foundation, and then the superstructure is what you lay upon it. And there's an alloy of things. I think he's going to remove the wood, hay, and straw. The things that were done in the power of the flesh. The things that we did not do in his power, but tried to do. Even the mistake of doing things for Jesus rather than allowing Him things to do things through us. But I asked two questions about this. Will there be the will there be the pain of seeing our sins for the first time as God saw it, which is a different way of seeing it than because we always have a way of justifying and relativizing. Will we see the sin of unused potential? It's not unlike the imagery there, wasn't it, at the Schindler's List? And I think that's close to what may be there, but He says He's going to wipe away every tear from your eye. I think there will be a loss, perhaps a regret, and maybe a dilated vision of your whole life in a moment where it's all the things you've done, but you see them for the first time as He sees them. And then there are no secrets. It's all been dealt with, and you see it now as God sees it, because your sins and your past cannot blackmail the joy of heaven. And so what you have now is something that's going to endure. I rather suspect that if that's the case, for the first time, you could actually allow another person to enter into your own soul. But the point is, because now you have nothing to hide, because everyone sees. But that said, I think there will be that regret, but He wipes away the tears. So what the wise thing then would be to live so that you will hear the well done. The wise thing would be to live and to ask the Spirit of God to convict you and to guide you and to bring you into an increasing apprehension that it must be Him and not me, that it must be done by Him and through Him and in Him. And that is an ambition that I have, that I may be pleasing to Him. So having that simplicity of an ambition of being pleasing to Jesus, I think can actually purify my intentions and humble me to realize I'm always going to be in a process of growing. And until I am with Him, the iceberg will be there. The stuff below the waterline always will be there. And new things, as soon as you discover one thing, another thing will pop up, and you got to deal with it. And another and another. And as you humble yourself and allow the Spirit of God to convict you of that and respond and thank Him for that grace, then new truth can be given. But you see, God will not give you light that you did not respond to. You see, more light. If you didn't respond to the light He's been given you, He has 1,000 ways of getting your attention until you do. So there's all kinds of ways that He can use to get our attention. Wouldn't it be smart, though, when we hear that wonderful phrase by C.S. Lewis? You remember what? He whispers to us in our pleasures. He speaks to us in our conscience. He shouts to us in our pain. Pain is God's megaphone to rouse the deaf world. Wouldn't it be smart to listen to His whispers instead of waiting for pain? Wouldn't it be smart to listen to and live in such a way that you want to hear well done? The simple desire to be pleasing to the Father. And it's a natural and proper desire to be pleasing to Him. And the amazing thing is, you can please Him, because He's easy to please, but impossible to impress. Yes. If you have a question, come to the microphone so we can all hear you. Good, now we have a problem with 2 people. That's good. Before it was no people.
First of all, Ken, I'd like to thank you. You've brought so much up in my heart that I'm having a hard time processing it at the moment. I think of The Great Divorce by C.S. Lewis,
yes.
and I think of Him wiping away every tear, but He strips us of our guilt and our He humbles us.
Yes.
And I think of an insight that you've given me about the Trinity. I've recently read The Shack, and I know you have that.
Yeah.
That's a confusing book.
Yeah.
However, he has to be triune because he
Yeah.
himself is relational.
Yes.
And I think of how when God is not in our relationships with others, it's
Yes.
not a true relationship.
No, it's not. It has to be more than one person. Yeah.
Yeah. That's all I wanted to say. I just thank you so much.
Well, thank you. Yes. I mean, at the end of the day, that's what life is about relationships. But the enemy of relationships is going to be selfishness. And the animator of relationships is other-centeredness. But how can you be other-centered? It's only when you are allowing the Spirit to live in you and through you, and you humble yourself enough to receive His grace and to be dependent, increasingly dependent, but you know the process will never stop. It's an unpleasant truth that we will always learn more from our setbacks and our failures than we will from our successes and our achievements. And so He strips these things away so that we can be stripped of lesser goods. Because at the end of the day, any disobedience is really a distortion of a good. And so we want to order our loves, order our desires. So ask yourself this question that I've been asking a lot. What do I want more than anything else? What do I want? And that's what He said. What do you seek? And then, who is He to me? And then, what is an enemy to that relationship? Is there something that I love more than Him? So my desire for all of you is that you so increase your appetite that you finally admit that only God can suffice to satisfy it. It's bigger than anything. There's no earthbound joy, felicity that's big enough to sustain the awful, awful weight of human desire and aspiration. Because you've made us for yourself, O Lord, and our hearts are, what does He say? Restless. So without that, you're looking for infinity and timelessness. You're looking for one who transcends time. You're one who is infinite and transfinite. Only He is big enough. Any other good in which you fix your joy will let you down in the end. There was another question over here, though. Yes.
Yeah, thank you so much. My question was, you talk a lot about beauty and kind of the awe of beauty, and it's a way of accessing God and His grandeur. I was just curious, like, in today's day and age where there's so much distraction and it's easy to overlook that, how do you think we could better, as like our present age, how do you think we could better access that or appreciate it or slow down enough?
Yeah, that's a great question because this is an amazing time, the best of times, the worst of times. The old image is true, but the forces are being ramped up for both good and ill. But so the wisdom that would be was what am I setting my mind on? What am I focusing on? So when I use Philippians 6 and 7, 4, 6 to 7, not being anxious, but giving it to Him in the first place is a spiritual apprehension. But then verse 8 tells me what to fill my mind with. And so if I really analyze that list in Philippians 4:8, what was true and right and honorable and lovely and worthy of praise, what's good and excellent, that's not exactly what you find in the news. And so the wisdom would be to be informed, but at the same time to be focusing on, and as we're commanded to do, set our mind on the things above where Christ is, seated at the right hand of God. So you're to be aware of your time, but you're to also contextualize your time in terms of the eternal truths of God and what He's going to bring about. So what I focus on, and this is an action then, so it's a heart, head, and hands thing. It's an inside-out process of living that we're trying to help people. We describe it as loving well, learning well, and living well. And the interior life. So I find myself in a very real way more and more drawn to beauty, more and more drawn to the beauty in the created order on every order of magnitude. And we're actually describing how we can make that more available to a wider array of people as a resource that would Hoag's object. No one even knows what this crazy thing is. But all these marvels, I mean, you can't make this stuff up. This doesn't just evolve suddenly. Suddenly it looks like a leaf. This is not going to happen. It's just, and God takes great pleasure when He asks Job about his creation. Did you notice this? Did you notice this? This would be a good one. When I got this little guy walking around here with my little, he's a high strutter. And these gluey little appendages and these marvels of beauty that so transcend when you look at octopi and cuttlefish, cephalopods, the beauty of this the bizarre nature of what God has made in this world. And we, I think, can amplify our appreciation of this. This is, you think it's an ornament that was made, it's an orchid. I just love the beauty of the world, and I think there are sources and websites and resources that we can use to actually amplify our appreciation, because the more I do that, the more I can appreciate the living God. And He's the one who told us, the heavens declare His glory. So I want to be a person who uses new information, new apprehension in science that we could never have known about before to amplify of worship. And the more we do that, the more we can then find our true joy, our true place, our true satisfaction. Here's the planet Earth, seen through the rings of Saturn rather. It's an amazing thing, rather humbling. So you recognize that God loves us, pursues us, woos us in ways we can't even imagine. He's got a sense of humor too, because God does this sort of a thing. And this, in the Museum of Creative Beauty, I'm going to have a whole, not just an eye room, an eye building, because it has to have the cephalopod eyes are very, very different from insect, these compound eyes, which are very different from the kinds of eyes on amphibians, and it just goes on. The vastness and wonder of this created order is beyond imagination. It's striking. So I think that you can amplify that. And one of the things I recommend people do is to get some of these images and play it with music, and then have a scripture. So you're now layering your experience of the scriptures by taking a truth from the Word of God, and then you amplify it by listening to something that speaks to your soul, as the psalmists would do. And then third, you could then have the visual imagery that's so readily available. So I think it becomes an exercise of preparation, of perspective, of really settling your mind on truth and beauty and goodness. Kind of wrapping your mind around it by using the fact that the biblical vision of life is the most incarnational of any vision of life. Nothing is even close to it. That it says that the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. And now, here's the amazing thing. He wants to become flesh and dwell in you and through you. So you become the Word becomes flesh. It's an amazing thought. You couldn't make this stuff up. It's just filled with unique thoughts that the one who made all things is the one who redeems all things and makes us spiritual beings, but who are also amphibious, having one foot in earth and one in heaven. So to live that way, I think, is a way to expand our sense of beauty, expand our sense of using that. There's the amphibian eyes. I just love these crazy things. Who but God could, with such a crazy array of things, and this is just one component of this beauty of God. So I just love it. It's just, I marvel at it. And it's also then it's also good when I take a text of Scripture, start meditating on it, and then start showing a picture, and then listening to contemplative music. It just brings me into His presence. And so you have to find what images, what music works best for you. We all have different tastes and sensibilities, but do that because it's available. And I encourage people to make that a part of their practice. Yeah. Any other questions we've got? Yes. Yes, come on up to the mic so we can all hear you. Yeah.
I'm amazed at how wise you are and how childlike you are, because I'm a teacher.
I'm in my second naivete, as I put it.
Yes.
It's my sandbox.
I'm a teacher, and you've just given me an understanding of come unto me as little children. There's been a lot of debate about that, right? What does he mean? What's he mean? Yeah. And for me now, part of what he meant and means is that we become like children, because who has a better imagination, a bigger imagination than anyone but God? A child looks upon the world with a vivid imagination.
Using your imagination, you're absolutely right. And this is what I'm thinking here when I think about beauty. I think about using your imagination, being open to new possibilities. And I think this whole idea, why is it that I put away childish things, Paul says, doesn't he? In 1 Corinthians 13. But you do not want to eliminate the childlike wonder when we do the other. Most do. I think you can cultivate it. I have a friend of mine, for example, who never appreciated beauty. The guy's about 80 years old. And the most astonishing thing is my friend is suddenly noticing things that he never noticed before. He's always seen this, but never had that, you see? And then when you have wonder, then you become curious. And then, the best of all, that tiny fraction of people who do, but it's a call for us to submit to the mystery and wonder that transcends your imagination because it's so far beyond you. So the more I expand my vision of what the world is about, so I'm always trying to find ways in which I can do that to just look at these crazy things and tell me that God doesn't have fun in doing these things, you see. And the magnitude and magnificence of his work is beyond imagination. It's just these urchins, and from urchins to birds to everything you can think of, the exquisite work and the fractal designs and the geometries of nature. It's full of math, it's full of mystery, it's full of magic. And so you see this glory of God. And so it's there. It's what you choose to put in your mind. But I would ask you to pray for the grace of the second naivete, which you become more amazed by things, more grateful, more surprised by what you see, because you're surrounded by mystery and wonder, but most never even notice it. So I'll give you one example of that, if I can do so here. A recent trip that I took in Charleston. You notice what I'm doing. I'm taking pictures of the trees. You see, because that's what I just said. I like this architecture is phenomenal. And I just look at this beauty and this glory and this splendor. This is the time to look, by the way, right now. You see the dendritic architecture of trees, and it's a great display. Went to shape song singing as well, very strange, but very enjoyable as well. So my point is only that I just love to explore the glory of God and to see his work. It's all there, but most don't even notice. And so when you notice a sunset or you notice a bird singing, and train yourself to have the acuity to notice. It's almost like God says, I'm glad you noticed it. You see, because few do. Notice the sunset. Notice the moon. Notice the beauty in your as you go for a walk, and make it a beauty walk, a prayer walk that actually incorporates that. So then you realize you don't have to stop playing. When did we stop playing? And when did we stop wondering? And when did we stop being full of surprise and laughter and surprise at things that creep up on us and they're there? God takes delight in it. And you read his descriptions of his works to Job, he's pleased with that. Hey, you notice this thing? You notice that? Because he takes pleasure in his works. Let's do the same.